Welcome to Dr. Creepin's Dungeon. Weirdness is a subjective and multifaceted concept that refers to something that deviates from what is considered normal, typical, or expected in a particular context. It involves a sense of peculiarity, oddity, or unconventionality that may provoke surprise, curiosity, or even discomfort in some people, as we will see in tonight's 4 strange tales. Now, as ever before we begin, a word of caution. Tonight's stories may contain strong language, as well as descriptions of violence and horrific imagery. If that sounds like your kind of thing, then let's begin. Fresh Meat by Corpse Child. You know, I used to laugh at the idea of being a vegetarian. The idea of purposefully not eating meat used to sound so dumb to me. I mean, yeah, healthy lifestyle and all. And yes, I am aware that some people actually can't eat meat because of an inability to digest it. But come on. How could you say no to a nice full rack of baby back ribs or a quarter-pounder New York-style steak, right? Well, guess the joke's on me now. After what happened, I can't think of any of that without wanting to puke. I'm going to put this out there now. If you're faint of heart or weak of stomach, do not read this. Let me also go ahead and say that no, I'm not talking about Mickey D's either. Say what you want about their food not being actual meat or whatever. But I can guarantee you, whatever it is made of, it's far less horrific than what I saw at a place I used to work at. Mr. Pigsley's Diner. Home of delicious meat, happy bellies, and having a snorting good time. Those words, the big, bold, red words plastered next to that smiling, fat-ass pig with a 50s-style football jacket and haircut, will always haunt my nightmares. The place itself was one of those that was made to resemble an old-timey diner from the 50s and 60s. Black and white tiled floor, vintage photos from car shows, old stuntmen, or shots of Elvis Presley, as well as different antiques on display. The place even had an actual jukebox, coin-operated with actual CDs instead of the touch-screen ones you see nowadays. In the middle of the dining area was where the bar was. During the day, till about 6 or so, it was a nice cream bar, with the barley sodas being brought out later on in the evenings. Remember how you could bring your kid up to the bar on a Friday afternoon for a little oinkers hour, where the ice cream was handmade right in front of them, and they got whatever flavor and toppings they wanted, and however much of it they wanted for free. Aside from this, they also had the Piglet Wall of Fame, where the Rugrats would have pictures taken of them in little pig masks with the mascot, Mr. Pigsley, standing beside them as they scoffed down a 3-ounce plate of pulled pork. Well, of course, the kids loved it, and the parents loved it too for how dirt cheap the food was. Now we're talking $15 tops for a large-sized barbecue plate with 2 large sides with a drink. I say all of this to say that the place was very family-oriented, well, particularly when it came to bringing the kids. My family actually used to take me and my brother Andre when we were little kids, and, like I said, with all the other kids, we too had more than our fair share of our little oinker hours on Fridays to kick off the weekend, and had our pictures added to the Wall of Fame, which are all gone now, after what happened. Now, take that and fast forward to almost a year ago. I'm 21 and having just moved out of my parents' house with no degree or any other job experience, and I needed to have a way to make rent for my apartment. And you can imagine how difficult a decision it was for me to choose Mr. Pigsley's Diner as my go-to. I was hired almost on the spot, after I put in an application to be a cook. Well, the pay for the job I'd be doing admittedly wasn't quite as bad as I was expecting. $11 an hour, 40 hours a week. Of course, being that it was strictly second shift, this meant long, exhausting nights slaving in the kitchen, and then closing the kitchen. It was rough, but I had to do it. And after about a month or 2, I'd just about gotten used to it. Actually, it wasn't long after that I was getting my first raise, to $11.75. I'd also managed to get to a point, usually because the other kitchen staff were out back taking a smoke, but I was actually able to handle working most areas of the kitchen alone. In other words, I'd gotten pretty good at my job pretty quickly. One of my duties, unfortunately, was washing any remaining dishes at night when we closed. It sucked, mostly because of the fact that it was always the grill utensils and shit that I got stuck washing. You know, the shit that would be the dirtiest. And we had to wait until we were closed for the night to wash them. Because of this, and because the shift manager, Trish, usually dragged her feet with her part, making sure everything is done right, as well as the fact that closing shifts only had 2 people around to shut the place down for the night, we weren't usually getting out of there until about 1 or 1:30 in the morning every night. Well, it's because of this that things would take a weird turn. Funny enough, I almost didn't even notice it. It was a Friday night, which of course meant we'd been slammed all day with business, and I was beyond tired and ready to be done with the place for the night. I was in the sink room, located a little ways behind the kitchen and grill area, next to the freezer and dry stock, washing the dishes, as best I could anyway, while Trish finished up with the money. Since my phone was dead, I couldn't listen to music or podcasts while I washed the dishes, like I usually did. And that's when I heard it. It was very faint, and again, I almost didn't hear it. It almost sounded like a faint groaning noise. But being exhausted and figuring that it was just the electrical hum of the freezer, I shook it off and continued. It was when I was just about finished with the dishes, though, that I heard it again. Louder this time. Listening a little harder, I noticed that it was indeed coming from the freezer. I pressed my ear to the door, and I could hear it much louder now. Concentrating, I thought I could hear the sounds of muffled sobbing from inside. I tried pulling the handle to open the freezer door, only to find it locked. Weird, I thought. Why is the freezer locked? I was never told before that the freezer was supposed to be locked at night. Maybe it's to keep the meat fresh, keep everything cold. This didn't make much sense to me, but I ended up having to just go with it when I heard Trish calling for me, telling me she was ready to go home. I pretty much immediately forgot all about it until the next night, closing the kitchen when I heard it again. Like last time, the freezer door was locked, and inside I could hear a very faint sound like someone groaning. It was louder this time, a lot louder. I also noticed this time that it seemed like it would randomly let out sharp bursts of crying or wailing. At one point I thought I could hear a shrill sort of screaming noise as well. What the... Started knocking on the freezer door. Hey, hello, hey, is someone in there? Nothing. The only response was the continued groaning noises from the other side. I tried knocking again. Hey, what's going on? I spun around to see Trish standing behind me, looking confused. What the hell are you doing? Have you finished yet? Yeah. I looked at the freezer. Hey, is there any particular reason the freezer's locked? She cocked her eyebrow. What do you mean? I pulled the handle to demonstrate. Her eyes continued looking confused as she then tried to open it herself, with the same result. She said, resigning. That is weird. No, I don't know why the heck they'd have it like this. What's got you so worried about it, though? Well, I thought I could hear something, or somebody in there. What do you mean? She asked, looking even more confused now. I shrugged and chuckled nervously. I don't know, I just kept hearing these weird noises coming from in there. I pressed my ear to the door again, still hearing that faint groaning sound. Hey, do you hear it? Well, still looking skeptical, she then pressed her ear to the door. She stayed like this for a moment before shaking her head. Sounds the same it always has. At least, same as it has since I've been here. Well, this is an old place, though. The wiring in there must be on the fritz. You sure? I asked, cocking my own eyebrows in confusion. Because it sounds like someone's in there. Oh yeah, besides which, we can't get in anyways. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm kind of like to get out of here and go home before it's time to open the place back up. She held up her phone, reading almost 1:45 a.m. And with that, I gave one last look at the freezer before turning and following Trish. But that night I couldn't shrug it off like I'd done before. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop imagining something or someone in the freezer. Moreover, I couldn't stop wondering about what that sound was. Now, obviously I wasn't buying the whole just the old 40 wiring crap. What the hell were they doing in there? Well, as it happened, the next day was when the owner, Mr. Pigsley, would be in for one of his little routine visits. He'd usually come round once or twice a month, unannounced, and just sort of check in, make sure everyone's doing everything that needs to get done. Basically a sort of general inspection, One thing I noticed too was that one of the first things he always did was to check out the freezer. Naturally, I figured if anything was going on in there, he'd know, right? As well as this, we were actually slow, for the first time that week, by the way, which made it relatively easy for me to ask him about it first thing when he came in. "What do you mean?" he asked me, cocking his eyebrow like Trish did. "Well, the past 2 nights, sir, I've been hearing these weird noises coming from the freezer. Whenever I try to go check it out, though, it's always locked. Is it supposed to be?" He frowned. "What sort of noises?" "I don't really know, sir," I replied, admittedly feeling a bit awkward. "It sounds like someone's in there." And he stared, frowning at me for a moment before opening the freezer and walking inside. I followed him. Inside, of course, I heard the droning of the refrigeration systems. In other words, the normal sounds it should have been making in there. And there were boxes labelled "fresh meat" stacked against the walls. Everything was there just the way it was supposed to be. No weird sounds, nobody else in the freezer, aside from me and Mr. Pigsley. "Well," he said, turning back to me, "I don't hear nothing." He looked back inside for a moment before saying, "Okay, nothing except for the fridge wires on their last legs. I reckon I'll have to get that looked at, won't I?" He chuckled when he said this, before then saying, "Hey, thanks for letting me know." I stood for a moment, confused, before stammering, "Yes, sir, sure thing, yeah." I then felt the hand of Andy, one of the other grill hands, tap me on the shoulder, telling me I was needed back in the kitchen. Mr. Pigsley waved his hand dismissively before turning and going back into the freezer. Fridge wires on their last legs? I couldn't take my mind off of how wrong that sounded to me. For one thing, the fridge actually sounded normal. Plus, after taking a peek at the thermostat outside, I saw that, well, at least according to the reading at the time, it was working just fine. Secondly, this didn't make sense to me because if they really were on their last legs, shouldn't he have known that and done something long before now? On top of all that, though, was the fact that the big question wasn't even answered. Why the hell was the freezer door locked? Not only this, how was it locked? There were no bolts or anything on the handle, inside or out. As much as I wanted to shove all of this at Mr. Pigsley until I got an answer, I wouldn't get the opportunity again before he left. That night I wasn't the one to close the kitchen, having agreed to switch shifts with Andy so he could get a few more hours in. For some reason he was only scheduled 2 days that week for 5 hours each. So this meant I was getting off that night at around 10 p.m. Because I was still skeptical, or should I say suspicious, about the whole freezer thing, I asked him, as part of the agreement, if he'd keep an eye on the freezer and tell me if he noticed anything off about it. He agreed, though I could tell he thought I was nuts. And so 10 o'clock rolled around, and I was punching the clock, but not before checking the freezer one last time. It was unlocked, and full of nothing but frozen food. I was heading out back to my car when I heard a rustling sound coming from the dumpster. Looking over, I could see the lid pushing up, like something was trying to get out. I was about to brush it off as probably just raccoons or maybe a couple of stray cats, when I heard what sounded like snorting. What the And I was cut off when I then heard a high-pitched squealing noise that almost seemed to echo in the empty parking lot. This caused my heart to skip about 3 or 4 beats, and I had to close my eyes and cover my ears tight. This was followed by several loud banging noises coming from inside the dumpster. I watched this continue, jaw slacked, frozen in shock, until the lid of the dumpster suddenly flew open. For a brief moment, I saw what looked like 2 pig ears slowly emerge from the dumpster, followed by 2 dark, empty, marble-looking eyes glinting into the streetlights. That was when I took off like a bat out of hell and bolted back around to the front of the diner and ran inside. "Hey, guys," I shouted, crashing through the front doors. They immediately looked at me, wide-eyed and startled. I struggled to speak, being out of breath. There's something out there." "Where?" Andy asked. I pointed to the back and said, breathless, "At the dumpster." His face immediately fell into one that said, "Oh, you're shitting me here, right?" I caught my breath as Trish asked what it was exactly that I'd seen. I began, remembering those 2 black beady eyes glaring at me. "I think it was a pig." "A pig?" Trish asked, her voice completely bewildered now. Andy stared at me for a second before scoffing. "Dude," he said, sounding like he was 2 seconds from busting his gut, laughing in my face. "Whatever shit you're on." "I'm serious," I shouted, cutting him off. He just kept looking at me like I was crazy while Trish looked lost. I saw 2 pig eyes staring at me from the dumpster. I heard it squealing too. "Where the hell could it have come from?" Trish asked. "I mean, there's no farm around here." Andy snickered and remarked, "Oh, maybe the last truck had one that wasn't quite ready yet." Oh, Trish snickered at this too. I was the only one, though, who wasn't finding this funny. "Oh, damn it, Andy. I'm not screwing around here. I saw a giant pig staring at me in the dumpster." But he just snickered again. "Ah, it was a giant pig." He then made a surprised face and turned to Trish, saying, "Hear that, Trish? A mean old monster pig is going to get us, eh? Oh!" I curled my hand into a fist, clenching my teeth. I was getting really agitated really quickly. Before I could do or say anything, though, I heard something coming from the back behind the kitchen, near the freezer. "What?" Trish asked, noticing my attention towards the back of the diner. I shushed her before starting towards the freezer. "Listen," I whispered. It sounded like something big was dragging its feet across the floor. "You hear that?" I watched Trish and Andy cup their ears. Listening closer, I could also hear the sound of someone's muffled bawling in the distance, sounding like their mouth was covered or taped over. I watched as Trish seemed to take notice. "What the hell is that?" she asked, turning now to look towards the back like I was. Andy just looked at the both of us, confused. "Now you two, Trish. What are you guys going on?" He stopped when he heard the sound of the freezer door opening. Now his eyes were wide. "What the fuck? Who's back there?" We heard the freezer door shut, still hearing the muffled screaming from behind. Andy started towards the back when I shot out my hand, stopping him. "Wait. What if it's some maniac with a gun or something?" And he just pushed past me towards the back. I followed after him, with Trish joining behind me. The sounds from the freezer were louder now, shrill, like someone was being tortured. I could hear what sounded like a young girl, high school age, screaming, "No, please don't, let me go." These were followed by sharp cries of pain that caused the 3 of us to have to cover our ears. And as we were doing this, the sounds, both of screaming and the weird squealing, were getting louder and louder. I began imagining the thing on the other side to be some sort of mutant behemoth pig monster, like Andy had said, with huge muscular arms and gigantic tusks that impaled me like a kebab. Finally, Andy ran and got the emergency fire extinguisher and used it to batter the door until we heard something fall to the ground, crashing on the other side before shoving the door open. In front of the door was a bunch of the fresh meat boxes that had apparently been propped against the door to keep it shut. Now knocked over onto the floor of the freezer, I saw a few of them had broken open, scattering red, meaty, bloody chunks all across the floor of the freezer. Just for a brief second, I looked closely at a pile of the stuff, and that was all it took to make me start to retch. There, spilling out of the box, was what looked to be a large intestine, coiling out from the severed legs of what looked to be a small child, possibly even an infant. Almost on cue, the smell of a dead body flooded my nose instantly, further causing my stomach to turn over on itself. I wasn't the only one struggling to keep from spilling their stomach either, after seeing this. Andy had to cover his mouth and turn away. To her credit, funnily enough, given how she always claimed to hate scary movies in the past when I talked about them, Trish was the only one who wasn't affected by this, at least not as much as me and Andy. She took the lead and went inside. It took another second of pulling ourselves together before me and Andy could follow her, though. Inside, we could all hear the sounds of screaming and pigs squealing from the far end of the freezer. Slowly, the three of us made our way towards the back, towards this sound. Despite what I said earlier about Trish being the most strong-stomached out of the three of us, what she saw next made her vomit right there in the freezer where she stood. There, in the middle of the floor, was a young girl. Couldn't have been a day over 17. Pinned to the floor, naked, and on top of her was a giant, hairy, overweight gorilla of a man, wearing what looked like one of those pig's masks you'd see from Party City on Halloween. The pigman stopped, as he must have heard Trish, and reared up from the girl before turning to look at us. For a second, we all just stood there, me and Trish both speechless with horror, while Andy was the first to speak. "Who are you? What the fuck are you doing?" Whatever, just stood snorting angrily, like he was rearing up to charge at Andy. Trish ran over to try and help the girl, when she was snatched by the throat and hurled into a stack of meat boxes behind her. I ran to help her up, while Andy charged towards the pigman. Just like Trish, Andy was caught by the throat before being forced to the ground. After helping Trish up, she ran over to help the girl, while I tried to help Andy. The pigman had him on the ground, crushing his throat and pressing one knee on his chest, crushing his ribs. And without thinking, I hurled myself at him, shoving him off of Andy and into the wall to the right of us. Andy was wheezing and gasping for air as I helped him to his feet, while Trish rushed her and the girl out of the freezer. "Call the police," I shouted to her as she ran out. When I looked to where the pigman had landed, I saw that the mask had fallen off. Now, against the wall, buck-ass naked, was Mr. Pigsley. What the... Before I could even finish that thought, he looked up at me, glaring, before letting out a deafening squeal and charging at me. In less than a few seconds, he was on top of me, ravenously trying to bite at my face like a rabid dog. I tried pushing his face away, which resulted in 3 of my fingers getting bitten, hard enough to start bleeding and go numb. Andy tried wrestling him off of me by getting him in a chokehold, only to be met by a backhand that sent him into the wall again. Now he was crushing my throat like he had been with Andy. My vision started blurring when, the next thing I knew, I felt Mr. Pigsley's hand release my throat, causing me to grasp for air. Mr. Pigsley was on the ground, staring up at the ceiling, dazed, with Andy holding one of the boxes that he'd used to bash him over the head with. "Hey, you okay?" he asked. Yeah, I groaned, pain still shooting through my hand. I could hear Mr. Pigsley groan as he stirred on the floor. I told Andy to stay there and make sure he didn't go anywhere, while I went to check up on Trish. Sure enough, Trish and the girl were out front, talking to a couple of police officers. I joined them and they asked me where he was. I led them back to the freezer where Mr. Pigsley was still writhing on the floor. The officers then took over, leading us back out to the front. By that time, the parking lot was filled with police cars and an ambulance. After having them checked out by the ambulance, The other officers escorted Andy, Trish, and the girl home while I was checked out for my hand. I actually had to be taken to the hospital for it to get stitches. I read a few days after that, upon looking into the contents of the freezer, the mutilated remains of infants, as well as several teenagers, had been found with evidence that they were being ground up and processed using the meat grinder next to the dry stock area in the back. Mr. Pigsley was arrested and tried for kidnapping, as they were unable to link him to any of the human remains at the time. He claimed, though, that he had absolutely no idea what was going on, that apparently he was at his house one moment and then lying naked in the freezer the next. In the end, he was sentenced to 3.5 years in a psychiatric facility. The diner was closed down and condemned after that, and a month later it was cleared out and bulldozed, and is now serving as a vacant parking lot. I lost all contact with Trish and Andy, as well as anyone else from Mr. Pigsley's diner, soon after that night, and got a new job as a sales associate at a thrift store, where I work nowadays. Oh, the pay isn't as much, and the hours are long, sure, but my co-workers are pretty cool. Plus, at least I don't have to work around food anymore. Well, it was sometime last week that I was scrolling around online, just screwing around on my break at work, when I found old articles about local sightings of the Pigman. I clicked on them and read about multiple reports of people, namely teens and or small children, going missing in the dead of night in the town located just next to mine. Each time a few witnesses would claim to see a giant creature with the head of a pig and the body of a man lurking around. Of course, these were usually the tinfoil hat types making these claims, so it didn't surprise me that these claims weren't exactly taken seriously by authorities at the time. That said, they never found any suspects, nor were the missing persons ever found. But the worst part, the thing that's driven me now to have constant nightmares, was when I looked at the dates of the reports. They were all dated in the early 50s, right around the time that the diner had first opened its doors. All that time, I, as well as God knows how many others, had been eating children. What's even worse is that for almost a year, I was the one that had cooked it and served it to people. This is why I've decided 2 things. First, I will never work in another food establishment again. No exceptions. And the second is that I'm strictly a vegetarian. It was admittedly a bit hard at first. Like I said, how could you pass up a nice juicy prime rib? But any time I thought about meat of any kind, well, I can't help but remember what I saw in the freezer that night.
Tenth of October, 2019. Today was a good day. Recently all the diary entries were either gloomy, angry, or downright desperate, but not today. I saw my mom walk again. Just the sight of her shaking, grasping for balance as she covers the distance between her hospital bed to the clothes hanger, no more than a metre away. It brought tears to my eyes. It actually made me cry like the neighbour's baby in the middle of the night. It was genuinely just so amazing. 2 weeks ago, I really thought I'd lost her. When she didn't pick up the phone the whole day, this thought that something bad had happened to her just crossed my mind. When this vicious, pulsating image of her dying out, whispering for help while reaching out for the phone that was ringing my name on the display just a few centimeters away, but impossibly out of range of her paralyzed hands. And all this was going on in the back of my mind, slowly materializing with every failed call. Every time I would press the green icon and the line would beep relentlessly, lifelessly, I would feel the rushing fear, the chill. As I was putting down my phone, the nightmare of her casket going down into the cold ground was gradually seeping into reality. First time I tried dialing her was at noon, during my lunch break. Maybe she was at the shop and didn't hear. 1 hour later, still nothing. Each and every subsequent try became incrementally closer to the previous one. By 20 to 3, the display read 11 failed calls, and I was properly scared. She was getting old, and I know, old people forget and oftentimes put their phones in places they can't hear them, but this is Mum. No, not her. So I just stood up and left the office. Gary protested, but, fuck Gary. It seems I won't be seeing his stupid face much in the future anyway. I had to go. If I waited until 5, she'd be stuck in rush hour, and if not Mother, then I'd be the one having a heart attack. Thankfully, she lives close to my workplace. The trip is just 10 to 13 minutes in normal circumstances. Run 2 red lights and drive well over the limit, it becomes more like 4. I saw at least 2 cameras flash at me, but my wallet's ready. As I got into her building, everything was quiet. There were no ambulances, no worried neighbors. Even her best friend, old man-eater Lara, even she wasn't out there in the lobby, gossiping about how much my love life sucks. I think my misfortunes with Tina really amused her. Gave her some sort of sick kick. But, well, recently, I've been a fan of the F word, so F her too. I won't be hearing her breaking, screechy, and unbearably annoying voice after I go to China. I pressed the elevator button, but almost immediately realized it's ancient and slow, so instead I rushed up the stairs to the 4th floor. I flew up, and without as much as a breath, I sprinted directly to my mum's door, which was at the far end of the corridor. I slammed my hand on the bell, and then I started hammering on the door with my fist. "Mother!" I shouted, much like a madman, as I was hoping she opened the door with perplexed eyes and one of her trademark dishes sizzling in a pot she held in her hands, oblivious to the worry she'd made me experience. My own hand froze, mid-motion, as I focused my senses, flooding my ears with blood, hoping for a sign that indeed she was coming, that she was all right. In that moment, all I could hear was the most terrible sound of all. Nothingness. Complete and suffocating silence. In that instant, it seemed even the multitude of cars jammed like sardines in a can outside didn't make as much as a squeal or a clank. No, in that very moment, I felt truly alone in this world. My hands were cold, and they were trembling in a way I didn't think possible. I was panicking, out of breath and out of control. It took me what seemed like forever to thread the spare key into the lock. As the mechanism turned, the most terrible images started going through my mind. I could see my mother, dead on the floor, abundant foam escaping her purple, lifeless lips, her body colored in a way that no living human is. In my vision, she looked just like poor old Billy who died in the parking lot 2 years ago. I feared the worst. As I slammed the door open, I resumed shouting, but again, no response. Something was definitely wrong with Mother, with what I can describe as the most sickening and nauseating anticipation I've ever felt. I went from room to room, searching for the one person I genuinely love in this world. First was the living room, but there was nobody there. Next was her favorite place in the house, the sparkling new kitchen that I got her for her 60th anniversary. It did cost a pretty penny, but the smile on her face was so wide and so bright, truly priceless, giving a higher purpose to putting up with Gary, the self-righteous asshole. She wasn't there. I gave a sigh of relief in a momentary lapse of logic. She was somewhere in the apartment and I had to find her, to help her. Hoping it's not too late, I rushed towards the bedroom, passing by the door of the bathroom. It was this very same instance in time that my soul was ripped, cut to pieces by the sight my eyes had seen. My mother. She was there. Her head was resting on the floor and her body was half naked. Blue hue had spread throughout her skin. I collapsed, scrambling to make sense of what was there before me, facing, anticipating, putting my finger on her neck and feeling the faint, resonating pulse of her old, caring heart that had spent far too many beats in my name, for my sake. My whole being was sinking into a deep, endless hole as I reached out towards her. What if there was nothing? What if? That's the scariest thing about it at all. About death. What if this was it? No goodbyes, no time to settle what's left behind. When I die, I want to at least let people know that I was thinking about them in the end. What few words crossed my mind before all the words ceased to be, before I was no more. In that terrible moment of horrible expectations, I felt the one and only thing that could once more bring warmth back to the world. I felt her heart, barely beating through the coldness of her skin. Incredible relief, unfounded exultation. Feelings came to me that I never, ever felt before. I hugged her, giving her some of my own body heat, careful not to push too hard and worsen any fracture she might have. Shaking myself, I called emergency and through tears explained to them the situation. I shouted that they needed to hurry. So many times the operator must still be hearing my voice in her nightmares. The ambulance came in what they claim were a mere 6 minutes, but to me it felt like years. I recalled, as I was a child, and what me and Mum would do together. I remembered how happy she was when I held my master's degree in my hand. I really wanted her to stay with me. The paramedics arrived. They went through their checklists, and I understood nothing. Is she okay? What's going on? Is she okay? I kept on repeating like a broken radio stuck on the last bit of the cassette, hopelessly going in a loop. They didn't reply. They were too busy checking her vitals, administering a shot and putting her on a stretcher. I was getting desperate, confused and properly irritated. I was just about to snap when the more senior of the two paramedics turned to me and explained the situation. She's hypothermic, but that's likely because she fainted and spent around 2 hours in this state. The underlying cause of the seizure is currently unknown. There's evidence of trauma on her back, and her left hand might be broken. And again, this is most likely the result of the fall, not the cause. We don't have the equipment here to tell you more. She needs to go to hospital ASAP. This was so unbelievable, and yet happening. I could well understand the words the doctor was saying, but he was so to the point, and talking about how my mother had broken her arm, as if it was such a matter-of-fact thing. I just didn't know what to say. I knew I would do whatever it would take to make her well again. What's the best place you can take her to? I inquired, knowing full well her insurance wouldn't cover anything besides the neighborhood clinic. Then again, I'm pretty sure she'd have better chance of surviving if we just let her stay on the floor, rather than taking her there. That would be St. Anna, he stated, without as much as a glint of hesitation in his eyes. Following that were 20 sleepless hours, which I spent on a bench in the hospital, craving and only haphazardly receiving information about whatever was going on with Mom. As the new day dawned, so did a sliver of hope. The chief of the cardiology ward gracing me with his presence. He explained to me in layman's terms that her arteries were damaged and they had to insert stents in them to keep the blood flowing properly. This was all black magic to me, but I rejoiced at the part where he said she'd live and recover. I didn't manage to write a diary entry that day, and as Mum really seems to be doing well, I finally mustered the courage to write about the events that transpired. It all gives Black Friday a whole new meaning, honestly. Fingers crossed, I think the worst part is over. So back to today. Gary was his usual self, that is, a cock. He isn't taking well the fact I got chosen to move to the new office in China, but senior staff deemed he was, I quote, irreplaceable. So yeah, you're stuck, buddy. I hope you rot here and your fat wife keeps on beating you at night. Oh, and speaking about wives, things with Tina are just unbearable at this point. We have arguments every day, even when we don't actually see each other. The whole move to Beijing literally takes all my time and attention, and after I'm done with it, well, then we just never see each other again, and maybe a divorce from a distance. Yeah, I know I'm a coward for thinking this, but I really don't want to deal with her right now. I still have to sell my car, get a truckload of papers prepared, and deposited all over town. Obviously my mum requires a lot of attention too. Not that I blame her or anything, just that it's all too much for me right now. I need a break. Hope they have nice places in China. I don't think I'll be getting the chance to even get a good night's sleep until I land there. Definitely not if Tina continues on screeching all the damn time. I make it a point to never come home before 10, just to avoid as much of her as possible. I had to spend more than an hour at a gas station today, but it beats coming back. Oh, I swear, I feel like she'll knife me in my sleep one of these nights. Just the way she looks at me, there's this intense hatred oozing out. I think she knows what I did. She must. There's not much I can do right now, though. Everything, all my documents, my PC and my bed are in the house we share, and she should be happy she'll get to keep it after I'm gone. That's enough, right? I mean, I'm not saying I'm a gentleman or whatever, but at the end of the day, our relationship is over, and she gets a house for bearing with my sorry ass. People settle for less. Anyway, I'm dead tired. This'll be it for today. Oh, I hope tomorrow goes by fast. 11th of October, 2019. So, something funny happened. As today was Friday, I had to go to the Higher Education Degree Administration because it turns out they have a 10-day period to process requests. So, if I'm to fly to Asia the week after next, I really had to make sure my diploma would be verified by then. I go there. As usual, there's this sizable queue, and having no choice whatsoever, I take my place at the back. Little by little, we move like rats in a lab. The white light on the ceiling buzzes monotonously, much like 100 bees slowly banging their bodies into the glass, dying out in a noisy mess. Step, and then another. But not for long, as the lady at the desk stands up to take a break, the second one within the hour. I notice the very intrusive smell of sweat coming from this guy 3 people in front of me. It makes the air heavy and elusive. I think how much I hate people like him, people who not only have the indecency to skip a bath, but at the same time are arrogant enough to stand in the queue, in my queue. God. Judging by the balding top of his head, he was probably well in his 40s, most likely married. Well, his wife must be happy he won't ever cheat on her. Even a donkey would run away from that stench. My annoyance soon grew into repulsion, and then into scorn. My hands curled into fists. My mind was filled with ideas, images of me doing things to that guy. Things I dare not say. My breath became heavier. I started to tremble. I was excited, and then I was light. My vision failed me, my legs no longer having the strength to prop my body up, and I succumbed to an unexpected, nauseating fall. Someone caught me on the way down, barely able to prevent my head from hitting the floor. I could hear their voices, the distant yet raucous chanting of the men and women in the hall. Some of them were worried, but I felt, most of them were just annoyed. Nobody wanted to deal with a dying man on top of this damn queue. Well, I wasn't really dying. Why did I write that? Whatever. I guess the chronic lack of sleep is starting to take its toll. I could hear Tina murmur something in the middle of the night yesterday. It woke me up, and afterwards I just couldn't will myself back to sleep. I think I'll try the couch tonight. She's giving me those looks right now anyway. I'll just ignore her. She never understood why I write a diary anyway. Hey, if you want to reflect on what you do each day, how come you haven't killed yourself yet? She just said this out of the frickin' blue. You know what, Tina? I just can't be bothered at this point. I feel sick and tired out of my mind. So I'm just going to sleep, and hopefully this time around I won't wake up when you're trying to give me the creeps. 12th of October, 2019. Today was Saturday, and so I could spend some quality time with Mother. The doctor said she's recovering like a young girl, and she certainly looked it. We managed a stroll through the hospital park, and, man, she got better at walking than she used to be. Or perhaps I just got worse. At some point, though, she said something weird. Son, you should take it a bit easier. I know I cause you a ton of worries, but still, nothing's more important than your own health. No mother wants to bury their own boy. What? I exclaimed, surprised by how unexpectedly grim my mother's words were. I mean, look at this huge strand of white hair coming down the side of your head. You must be under a lot of stress, no? Morbid chills ran down my spine. For the love of God, I swear something strange was going on. I'm barely 30 yet. I know I haven't been taking the best care of myself, but I did comb my hair before going out. Well, perhaps a couple of white hairs here and there, but a strand? No, that was impossible. My ears got deaf with the rushing adrenaline. Mum was speaking words, but none of them were reaching me. I had to find my way to a mirror. What she was saying couldn't be true, but I also wanted to pretend like nothing was happening. Not so long ago, her life was hanging by a thread. I just couldn't trouble her. Sure enough, she proposed we rest on a bench, and I was happy to oblige. I offered I go buy us something from the nearest coffee shop and left her there. I rushed, running to the shop where I hoped I'd find a toilet, one that was bound to have a mirror on the wall. Storming in, I felt embarrassed as people turned their heads towards me, but my vexation was stronger than all else. I had to know. I went to the cashier and asked her if they had a bathroom. She looked at me with dread, her own hand trembling on its way to her open mouth. It was as if she saw something truly terrifying. Oh, what is going on with me? No words escaped her petrified expression, but still, she signed with her quivering eyes towards the right. I wasted no moments. I really had to know. I had to see the extent of the damage. I felt this disgusting metallic taste in my mouth as I opened the door. For an instant, I presumed my cardiovascular system had given up and my blood was gushing all out on the inside. Now, the mirror within sight, each and every breath felt harder, heavier. I had to look, but I was afraid because I knew something was off. Something was really wrong with me. I was sweating profusely. My vision was blurry. I was confused, not knowing what sensation to attribute to the fright and what to the ailment that had befallen me. I gathered my courage and my strength, and I looked. Oh, the man in front of me. It just couldn't be me. It wasn't a strand that was white. My whole hair had lost its colour, as if I'd bleached it. Even my hairdo, it wasn't what I remembered it to be. I looked so old. And my eyes, they were red, deep crimson red, dripping with sanguine tears and fear. I ran out, not caring or able to think about what the people in the cafe considered me to be. In fact, I hoped they saw me as a lunatic, a madman, because, well, then I'd be fine. Yeah, I'd drink up my meds, stay tucked inside the no-hands jacket, and emerge out of it a sane, healthy man. But if they saw what I saw, then I just don't know. I tremble at the thought. It terrorizes me ever since. I race towards Mother, a jumbled mess of thoughts and words spinning in my head, vertigo ransacking my afflicted mind. What was I to tell her? What explanation could I provide for the way I looked when I knew nothing myself? I'd paced no more than 20 meters when I heard this bone-rattling crack coming out of my right knee. Debilitating pain and terror followed soon, clenching and grasping at my very core. No, I couldn't let her see me. I had to somehow manage to find my way back to the car. There, I'd sit and collect myself. There, I'd pick up the phone and call the hospital. They'd take care of Mum. She'd gone through too much and come out on top. I couldn't throw all that away. I was either crazy or I was dying, and I had to protect her from myself. Run! Oh, I had to run before this, what I hoped was a fit of madness, overpower my fading conscience. All I needed was to reach my tiny metal box, close myself inside and recover in the safety of its shell. Oh, I always loved my little sporty Nissan, now more than ever. And it was in my sight. Going in, I put the radio on. Three Little Birds was playing, cushioning my clattering teeth into a halt, easing my breathing. Every little thing's gonna be alright, kept my soul from shattering, faced with the unknown threat hanging over me. Oh, thank God for Marley, I sighed, regaining most of my composure. Enough so I could ring the reception and make sure Mother would be all right as well. I'm sure she worries about me, how I looked and how I suddenly disappeared. Nevertheless, what could I have done? At least this way the nurses could lull her with some stupid excuse as to why I had to go so unexpectedly, rather than just having her see my face, my hair, and, well, figuring, ascertaining that something was really wrong with her child. What followed thereafter, I actually have little memory of. I felt drunk and dazed, muscle memory and the back of my brain allying together to bring me home in one piece. So, yeah, now I'm writing this. I was too afraid to look at the mirror. I'm not sure I want to know what horrors it would reveal. And speaking of horrors, Tina is still here. She sits at a chair on the dining table, opposite of me. She's awfully quiet today, but there's just something about her. Her eyes are filled with disgust, disdain, and seeing me look like I'm dying, they shine. Oh, happiness oozing out of them like pus from gangrenous limbs. The sight of her, it's unbearable. But also there's something about her. I feel she looks better today than usual. Is it because I've seldom seen her happy? Her skin looks smoother somehow. The many freckles that adorn her skin from spring to winter are now non-existent, and her wrinkles, etched on her face like the never-ending disapproving grimaces that she has towards me, even they have much receded. Is this all makeup? But then, she is acting weird. There's something that amuses her about me, and about my condition. What's she doing to me? Can my situation be in some way caused by her? But how? That's just impossible. It's crazy. Still, I rejoice at that thought. I much prefer I lose my mind than my life. I hope I'm better tomorrow. 13th of October, 2019. Oh, the 13th of October. Truly a cursed day for me. The phone rang earlier on, waking me up even though it was already early afternoon. I struggled to collect myself and pick it up, as everything was spinning before my eyes. The meter that separated me from my mobile device was much like a crevice in between two mountains, an abyss with no end. I only managed to accept the third call, and that was with great pain. My hands were shaking, my finger joints cracking under the otherwise banal weight of the light plastic phone. As I answered, it was someone who was calling for the car. My head was spinning, my brain blown to butter by the unbearable migraine that paralyzed my thoughts. The person on the other side of the line, he was talking, but all he said was muffled, muted by the agonizing pain rushing to my ears. We agreed, I think, that he comes to take a look at it later on today. Now. He's here now. He stands there, ringing at my doorbell. Tina stays behind me, expecting me to stand up and walk to him, go out and complete what is perhaps the most important task on my way to leaving this God-forsaken place and flying all the way to China. She grins. She knows. I know. I won't be able to. My legs are far too weak. My head feels as if it's about to burst and split, much like lightning decimates a tree from the inside out. She smiles. She knows. She's anticipating this. I have to go. Maybe if I get away from here, maybe I'll be saved. He's going to go away soon. Are you sure you want to stay down and let him? She whispers in my ear. Her voice so gentle, yet the words she says so sad and cruel. Is she killing me somehow? I look at her and I notice her hair. It's so beautiful. It radiates impeccably bright rays of light, raining down my failing eyes, hurting me but also arousing me. I feel so attracted to her. I must have her. I don't know what's happening with me. I must go. I clench my teeth as I attempt to stand up. Tina does not help me, but then again, she doesn't hinder me either. That metallic taste returns. I feel something warm spreading throughout my mouth. Confused, not yet understanding what's going on, I touch my lips and they're wet. Wet with my own blood. This is true terror. I must continue writing this diary, for there is something that compels me. I tremble, teeth rubbing against each other. Soon enough, one of them gets loose and falls, tumbling, touching the others and breaking them to dust. What has become of me? I am so tired. I feel like I should sleep. 14th of October, 2019. It's Monday today. I have to go to work. But I just can't. I just vomited. It was all stomach acid. Blood and lymph and all my teeth, what's left of it. I cannot talk. My body feels incredibly weak and brittle, as if bones were made of paper and muscle is nothing but mud bleached and put together by marrow and glue. And the pain. It's far too strong to move or even think. As I'm writing this, I lose my fingernails one by one, leaving bloody traces on my laptop keyboard. Why am I even doing this? Why am I dying? Tina is here. She's put one of her gorgeous summer dresses on. Her legs. I don't remember them ever being this long and silky. My eyes can't help but be drawn to her curves, my heart pulsating with the very movement of the scarce fabric covering her silhouette. She sports high heels, making her tower above me, casting down a shadow of both insane beauty and deep hatred. Oh, I really want her. She sits next to me. My chest is shaking, the exaltation pressing piercing pain out of each and every inch of my skin. My dear Sam. She runs her hand through my hair. You know you mean the world to me, don't you? I trace the hundreds of hairs fluttering in the air, dancing their last tango with the draft at home. I feel the sharp coldness on my scalp, now bald and dry. However, I feel calm. I have my wonderful Tina with me. I am going to die a happy man. No, please, just let me live. Oh, sweetheart, you know that just won't do. 17th of October, 2019. I could not make a diary entry yesterday, the day before. All my fingers broke. I struggled to breathe. I think this is the end. But I am happy, for I have Tina here with me. She's getting more and more beautiful with each passing day. I so crave her. And I so hate her. It seems a demon lurks in that angelic body of hers. And she is wearing nothing but lingerie today. She tempts me. Her body is tanned and toned to cruel perfection. Her figure more feminine and exciting than any other woman who ever walked the world. I want her so much. If I could, the things I would do to her, but I can't. It hurts. Everything. I just wish I could sleep with her one last time. Before I fall asleep one last time. 19th of October, 2019. Please, if you read this, make sure you don't look at my beautiful Tina. She is all mine. I am all hers. Make sure you close your eyes and be swift when you kill her.
It turns out that the plague is still out there. It turns out we're not the only ones interested in the disease. I think I should say the disease is in the plural. Apparently, there are 3 kinds of plague in existence. There's the infamous bubonic plague, which infects the lymphatic system, causing a swelling of lymph nodes which leads to the appearance of the buboes. Then there are the less visible, but far deadlier kinds, pneumonic and septicemic, infection of the lungs and blood, respectively. Honestly, I had no idea there were 3 types of plague. I've only found that out after getting sick with 2 of the 3 variants. Well, at least that's what I think. I was completely fucked up at one point, to the point of hallucinating a bird-headed alien thing. God. 2 of my roommates died from whatever we had. Young, healthy men don't tend to die from the flu. Everything's been upside down recently. I don't know what's wrong and what's right. Some days I genuinely think I'm stuck in a dream, but then I snap back into reality. Zane and Adam's rooms are empty. They're not coming back. Chris and I didn't make it to the funerals. We told them we weren't sure if we were clear yet. Well, that was a lie. We just couldn't handle the truth. I'm not sure I still can. Everything is just so different now. It all started with the decomposing corpse of a cat Adam found at our doorstep in... It all started with the decomposing corpse of a cat Adam found at our doorstep in February. He kind of mentioned it as a side remark during that afternoon, saying he found it when he went out to work, and that he tossed it as far away as he could have from the apartment. 3 days later, he came down with a stomach bug, or so we thought. It started with stomach aches, nausea, diarrhea and vomiting. Soon enough, he was bedridden, paralyzed with fever. We just thought he was having the flu. It was the season, and there was a massive storm raging at the time. Well, it was so bad we'd even lose electricity from time to time. By the end of that same week, we were all feeling the same supposed flu. My head was constantly pounding, and my body felt weak and almost numb. My digestive system went second. I started vomiting like crazy on the second day of my illness. It was so bad I couldn't put anything in my mouth. The mere idea of swallowing made me throw up. Chris and Zane were complaining of chest pain and having difficulty breathing. I wasn't really surprised. They were coughing so badly, one would think they were about to have a lung collapse on them. On my third day of the illness, all 4 of us were bedridden, completely incapacitated. We just stayed in the living room together, and I guess we all got unbearably weak overnight together, probably watching some movie or something. It wasn't about taking care of each other. Of course, we did care for Adam when he was in this alone, although we didn't really devote all of our time to him, and everything just happened so fast, and all 4 of us were basically living corpses within the blink of an eye. We didn't see the doctor because we all thought we'd be fine, and when we knew we wouldn't be just fine, it was already too late. And then the electricity went out. And then the electricity went out of the window due to the crazy storm outside. I remember jokingly complaining about being kicked out, since it seemed like none of us would be able to make any money anytime soon. We all found it so hilarious, we laughed until our entire bodies hurt. Not that much aversion was needed to get there. I kept making jokes and fooling around during my waking hours because I was genuinely scared. I'd never felt so hurt and weak before. Never felt so worn out. Hell, I'd never been this sick up to this point. Not to mention how I was losing feeling in my legs from time to time, and how my feet were all bruised up from, nothing really. I didn't tell the other guys about this. I didn't want them worrying. They were worn out enough already. 6 days into my illness, I couldn't really walk anymore. I just woke up that day, not even feeling my legs. The other guys were still asleep, so I tried my best not to scream like a little child. I couldn't even feel my freaking legs. I smacked at my thighs a few times, but nothing. I felt almost nothing. My legs registered nothing. My fist felt as if I'd been beating on a punching bag. I nudged my feet, but they wouldn't move. I had to shift my legs manually off my bed in order to try and stand up. I couldn't get myself to stand up straight. Once I pulled myself up to my feet, I felt dizzy and my legs felt like they were made of paper, so I immediately sat back down. That's when the pain from my wrists came knocking at my mind's door. I feared the worst. The idea that I'd managed to break my arms flooded my mind. I felt my heart race like crazy for a moment. I slowly lifted my hands up and noticed how my wrists were only red and blue. It was only bruising. Only bruising, I thought. I threw myself back down to my bed and immediately felt nauseous again. It was the worst nausea ever. I felt like something was making its way up my esophagus, even though I hadn't eaten properly in a while. So I just threw up. It stung so bad, and my stomach felt like I'd swallowed nails. Everything burned and stabbed inside. I felt like I had a bomb filled with shrapnel in my guts. Obviously, the noise woke everyone up. I didn't pay attention to anything, because I was in so much pain. My whole body was becoming numb with pain. I felt something run down from my nose and onto my lips. I remember running my hand across my face and looking at it. There was blood on my hand. Blood was running across my lips. And then everything started spinning as if I was on a roller coaster. I felt so lightheaded I couldn't even form words in my head. I felt as if I was floating for a few moments, and then I came crashing down hard. My chest seized up. My chest seized up as if I was being crushed under a bed of pure concrete. I coughed and coughed and coughed. My throat went up in flames. I know Chris, who was faring the best out of all of us, was screaming something. At least, I think he was screaming. No clue what he was screaming, though. I kind of blocked everything out involuntarily. I was simply focused on getting that coughing fit out of my system. My chest was on fire. My throat was on fire. I felt something sticky coming out of my mouth with each passing cough. It was thicker than sputum. I didn't even think about it at the time. Everything just kind of went grey on me, and I passed out as the screams of my body trailed off into nothingness. I had a million dreams about being operated on by someone. I wouldn't call that a doctor. I mean, he was cutting me up and stuff, but it never hurt or anything. It's like I was just floating above my bed, and this person, this thing, I don't know, it was drawing my blood in a few of those dreams. I don't even know. It felt so weird, as if I was out of my own body. I wouldn't call it an out-of-body experience because, well, I'm clearly alive, and I know that I was just dreaming. Well, at least I think I was dreaming. I woke up covered in a white sheet. I removed it from my face, and the sunlight that came into contact with my skin sent me into a spiral of pain and vertigo. I closed my eyes shut and turned my head away. I was trying to make sense of what was going on. To my knowledge, there was a storm raging outside a few hours ago, and when I woke up, it was sunny. I felt lighter than before, too, and could clearly sense my legs. I was feeling as if a truck had run over me, but still, I felt like I could actually somewhat operate my body. The sunlight was becoming less and less painful on my form, and I forced myself to look around. Everything seemed the same for the first moment or so. Then I noticed 2 white body bags laying where I remember Zane and Adam being when I passed out. What the fuck? I murmured to myself, sitting up as morbid thoughts flooded my mind. A monotone, sort of robotic voice cracked from behind me. It said something weird, in Russian, I think. I know what Russian sounds like, but this wasn't it. The sound freaked me out. I was wondering all these crazy things. My heartbeat rose so quickly, I felt lightheaded again. I was feeling myself slip out of it once more. And the voice spoke once again, in a heavily accented English. "Oh, you awake? Good." I forced myself to turn around as slowly as I could to see this BDSM-looking thing with a bird mask on it. Looked like a plague doctor from the movies, but with a bunch of belts all around it. You had plague. I'm sorry. The thing spoke again. What? I managed to blurt out. I was genuinely convinced it was the angel of death for a moment. You sick? Very. The creature pointed its finger at me. I fix, it continued. What the hell are you talking about? I said with some confidence in my words, as my breathing became shallower and my heartbeat fastened, making my whole body tense up. The thing lowered its head and poked at something on one of its wrists. Ah, there, he proclaimed with confidence. Now, my translator's working properly. I am here to help you recover from a particularly violent strain of the Yersinia pestis, otherwise known as the plague. I have the plague? I asked the creature, dumbfounded. Yes, you had it. Both your blood and lungs were infected, but I've since cleared it out of you. The creature proclaimed once more, pointing. This time it pointed at a pulsating fabric-laced thing that was laying on the floor and connected to my arm by a thin tube. I rubbed my eyes as my headache began subsiding slowly. What are you? I am a doctor. I came here to help you get rid of this bane before it kills you and spreads elsewhere. It seemed to me like you don't have a cure for this condition. My people have suffered greatly from it. It went on and on. We've been driven to the brink of infection by this bane. It was too late by the time we discovered a cure, and now there are not many of us left. Please trust my intentions. I only want to spare your kind the suffering that I had to endure. What? I mumbled. I was too weak to comprehend what it was saying to me. The creature chuckled and ordered me to rest. So I did. I was too confused and tired to argue. I even considered this being part of my fever dreams, but then I noticed he was doing something to Chris. Hey, what are you doing to him? I inquired weakly. Replacing his bioplasma. What's the word? Blood. Yes, blood. I am replacing his blood. That's the only way, the creature reassured me. Will he be all right? Yes, most certainly. What about the other two? Did you cure them? The creature paused for a moment. What is it? I insisted. Unfortunately, I didn't make it in time. Once I arrived, they were no longer among the living. I could detect the sorrow in his voice, but it didn't help in the least. I broke down screaming at the creature, needlessly blaming it for the two deaths of my best friends. I forced myself out of the bed and clumsily made my way towards the creature, who was standing with his back turned to me. I grabbed this thing, which was taller by about a whole... Okay, this time. I grabbed this thing, which was taller than me by about a whole head, and tried to turn it to face me, demanding from it to fix my diseased friends. It kept on insisting that it couldn't. I didn't let up, and an argument ensued. The thing finally yielded. Fine, there are your friends, he remarked as he made some sort of movement with his fingers. The sound of thrashing came out from both of my body. The sound of thrashing came out from both of the body bags. I turned around to see the body bags being torn apart from the inside. My heartbeat skyrocketed as I was watching the madness in front of me unfold. A blackened arm tore through one of the body bags. Another followed suit, and a blackened, bloated face sprung out of the body bag. It was contorted into an agonized scream, and the stench. God, that stench. I stood there, frozen in shock until my knees buckled and I fell into a puddle of dried-up blood and bile. The second body sprang forth from its body bag and emitted terrible, gurgling sounds. I felt myself get sick again. I wanted to throw up so badly, but there was nothing to throw up. Stop, I begged. I couldn't handle the smell, and I sure as hell couldn't handle the sight. I can't. I feel like I'm going to violent. Oh, I feel like I'm going to hyperventilate just thinking about this again. Holy shit. You wanted this, the creature beaconed. I thought, I mumbled. It retorted. I told you. I wished I could fix them, but I cannot. Please, make it stop, please. I burst out into tears. The abominations that were once my friends collapsed back into their body bags, and I crumpled into a ball on the floor and began wailing. The creature didn't utter a sound. It just kept on doing whatever it was doing to Chris until it was finished. That came fairly soon after I'd broken down on the floor. I kept on mourning the loss of my mates, even after I'd run out of tears to cry. I just rolled around in the organic waste on the floor, talking to myself about how I couldn't believe what was becoming of my life. At some point, this creature, this plague doctor, simply gathered up all of his stuff and left. But before he left, he told me that Chris and I were going to be all right. I couldn't help but laugh at his attempt to calm me down, and then he just left. I'll be honest here. I'm not entirely sure if what I'd seen there was real or just some sickness-related hallucination, like I've mentioned before. So, it turns out I've been asleep for about 2 months. Once that thing left, I turned on the TV to find out it was April. Another thing I found out after the plague doctor left and took the corpses of my friends with him is that they were decomposing before he arrived. I found the disgusting decomposition marks all over the mattresses they'd been lying on. Once Chris and I got enough strength up to leave our resting spots the following day, after my encounter with the plague doctor, we headed out to the local police station and tried to explain everything. It turned out that we indeed did have traces of the plague bacteria that our bodies were fighting off, as if we'd been administered some powerful cure. No one has really been able to explain my comatose state. No one has really been able to explain my comatose state, and the way I shook it off when I woke up. Oh, yeah. I did mention a funeral. Well, after 3 weeks of searching, the police located the bodies of Zane Garnham and Adam Siniski in a forest clearing not far out of town, surrounded by a bunch of dead animals. And they were all radioactive as fuck. Boom. I never wanted children, not even a little. I never batted an eyelash at the thought, even when I was in my 20s and saw all my closest friends were popping them out one after another. I don't recall a Sunday the year I was 27 when I wasn't attending a friend's baby shower. Even when Edward and I married, neither of us cared much for the idea.
We enjoyed our lives together, and he was in the military, so he was away a lot. The hours and days we spent together were precious, and at the time I couldn't even fathom spending time changing diapers or cleaning up after another in that capacity. I'd often watch my friends with their babies and think how lucky I was that I didn't have to worry about any of that. No babysitters required was the lifestyle I lived, and I enjoyed it. Edward felt the same way, and because, he was away for months on end, his most recent stint being in Afghanistan. It was hard being away from him, and adding the stress of children on top of all that was more than I could handle. Then, it happened. The phone call every military wife dreads. Edward was riding in a truck with 2 other men when they hit a tripwire, and the vehicle he was in exploded, blowing he and his comrades to bits. There wasn't even enough of him for a funeral. It's funny how one moment we're alive, and then we're just pieces of flesh strung about like feathers in the wind. It gets you thinking about how precious life really is, and how short. After he died, I went through a long grieving process. I had to take leave from my job in sales to learn how to live my life without him forever. When he was stationed somewhere, it was easy because I always knew he'd be back, but knowing he would never return was sharp, like a knife in your heart. A few years passed, and I began dating again, but it was never fun for me. I subconsciously compared every man to Edward. It wasn't on purpose by any means. It was just that they were all too tall, too thin, too stupid, too un-Edward. I took a break from dating, and 3 years after my Edward died, I woke up in a panic at 3 a.m. in the morning. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, looking at myself. I still had the dark hair and hazel eyes that had drawn Edward to me in the first place. "You have an aura of mystery, and it was hard to escape you," he once said to me. I looked at the pale ghost in front of the mirror and wondered where the pretty girl from that tiny town in England had gone to. She had hopes and dreams, and would spend her weekends in London visiting museums with punk rock hair shaved on one side. Now, she was a sad sack, staring at herself in the mirror, popping another pill just to get some chemically induced rest. What had I to show for my life? What had Edward to show for it? What would be my legacy here on this planet? That's when I realized, with a crushing blow to my ego, that I desired children. The wanting need became hard to break free from once I knew it was what I wanted. I just turned 36 on my last birthday. I was older, for sure. But why now? Why hadn't the desire hit me when Edward was still here and I was in my roaring 20s? Tears fell from my face as I thought about it. My time to conceive would be limited due to my age, so if I were to wait around much longer, my chances would be next to zero. I made my decision to go about conception the traditional way. I started to date again, only this time I used my skills in marketing to market myself in a way that would attract as many suitors as possible. I started with online dating instead of getting introduced to mutual acquaintances my friends knew. The first man that took me on a date was Nigel. He was a funny man with a small business near Lowestoft. I was attracted to him immediately and felt at once like he and I could get serious rather fast. We went on 2 more dates following our first encounter, but on the 3rd date, just as we were finishing up our dinner, where you think you'll be making eggs and serving them naked with mimosas, well, he says the most awful thing. "You know, before we go any further, I want you to know that I'm a sexual offender. It isn't what it sounds like. I was 26 and she was 15 at the time. I thought she was older. She certainly looked it, but she lied to me because, well, she was lying to her roommate. She was working at a bar and had run away from home. We were dating for a while, but then her mum saw her on the street with me, and the next thing I know, she's living at home again with her parents, and I'm in jail trying to put together the pieces.
Oh, you had to be joking,
I thought to myself. I bid him good night and promptly deleted his telephone number from my contact list and blocked him for good measure. The bad online dating didn't stop there, and more ridiculous encounters followed suit until I just gave up and decided to go the non-traditional method and try artificial insemination. It wasn't ideal, but man or no man, I wanted a child. Once I completed a series of tests, such as blood, fertility, and tissue samples, I was given the green light to move forward. I made my appointment on a Tuesday at a clinic, and as I sat in front of the doctor, he eyed me up and down before finally speaking.
You don't smoke?
No.
You are under 40?
Yes. The doctor seemed very serious as he looked over his charts, and then began to go over the test results once again. After about 3 separate IVF trials, I was provided a pregnancy test and learned that I was not pregnant. I was disappointed, and now being the 3rd time, I was going to be responsible to pay for additional treatments not already part of my medical plan. This could get expensive, and as I sat on the train headed home for the city, I looked out of the window thinking of Edward and how much I missed him right now. Just then, as fate would have it, I happened to be scrolling through my Facebook newsfeed when a clinical research advertisement popped up. Having trouble conceiving? Or have you already been through painful IVF therapies? Call this number and you may be a candidate for a paying clinical research trial. I nearly jumped out of my seat, and when I got off the train, I went straight home and called the number. I spoke to a nice woman who set me up an appointment to meet with a research assistant at Dolce Laboratories. I'd never heard of it, but I arrived on time and I sat in the small waiting room. It was a posh little office with white floors and glass walls. On the secretary's desk was an enormous purple orchid. She was very pretty and dressed in very nice clothing. I could tell they must have been Gucci because I owned the knockoff version of the very same blouse. I was nervous and could feel my hands sweating as I fumbled around and bit my nails. The secretary got a phone call on her tiny headset and then smiled at me.
Dr. Renee will see you now.
She took me to an office at the far end of a long hallway that smelled like bleach, and then, when I went in, I faced a short, friendly woman with a large smile on her round face.
Hi, I'm Dr. Renee Randall. Please, won't you sit down?
It's a pleasure to meet you, Jacqueline.
Likewise,
I said, smiling at the short, dark-haired doctor who could be my savior.
Tell me about yourself, Jacqueline.
Well, I'm 36, widowed going on 3 years now. I've been through IVF therapies in the past and they didn't work.
What made you decide to contact us?
Hope, I guess. I was hoping you could help me. After all, what do I have to lose? She smiled, nodding, and then handed me a form to fill out. Everything will be kept anonymous because this is a trial, so your name will not be listed in the research, only the results of the trial. We'll need to complete a background check, blood and tissue tests, obviously, as well as fertility testing. One other thing that we need you to consent to is that psychiatric evaluations will also be required throughout. We will require a letter of recommendation by someone close to you. We'll also require you to sign a non-disclosure and provide at least 3 additional references. Once all of these requirements have been met, we'll take your information to our board and make a decision on whether or not you will be one of our participants. Oh, we also screen the donors to ensure they are disease-free. I held the form in my hand, feeling suddenly very overwhelmed by all of this. I wondered what sort of trial this was going to be, considering all the extra testing and references required. I agreed to all the additional work, and once I completed all the tests, provided the references and the letter of recommendations made by my good friend Laura, I was a nervous wreck, waiting on them to make their decision on whether I would be a participant. I was at the park the day I got the call I'd been waiting on, with my best friend Laura, who was sitting on a blanket in front of me, while her 2 young sons played in the mud. Why on earth would anyone purposefully do this? She laughed at her sons as they seemed to be getting dirtier by the second. Oh, I don't know. I think you have a pretty nice gig here, I said, smiling at her. You know, motherhood is amazing, but it definitely has its downside. God, there are days I literally want to hang myself from the rafters in my attic. I shook my head, laughing at her. You don't mean that. Just then her youngest son came over and tackled her, putting mud all over her neck and white blouse. Hey! Look, Mommy, my fingerprints. Now you have them on you, he laughed. Do you see what I mean? She looked at me. Boys, why don't you go and play on the swings now? Her sons ran away, completely ignoring her, as they went toward where they'd just come from and began throwing mud at each other. I chuckled at Laura as she tried to get the mud off her shirt. God, my children aren't human. I'm convinced of it. I blame their father's gene pool. We laughed, and as we sat there, I got a call on my cellular. Oh, I think it's the research clinic, I said, staring at Laura in a panic. Well, what are you waiting for? Answer the damn thing. Your future of being a mother to little monsters awaits you, she said with a silly look on her face. Hello? Jacqueline Dunkirk? Yes, speaking. Dr. Renee Randall here. I just wanted to let you know that you've been selected to participate in the fertility trial. Oh my God! Oh, that's wonderful news! Laura looked at me and put her arm around me, joining in my excitement. Congratulations, Jacqueline. There'll be a package delivered in 3 to 7 days with the fertility device inside of it and instructions on what to do with it. You'll be given 12 weeks to complete the trial, which is 3 different ovulation periods. Please, if you have any questions at all, phone our office. However, everything should be self-explanatory. I got off the phone with Dr. Randall and looked at Laura as tears fell down my face. I was so excited, and Laura matched my own excitement with hers as she hugged me. The package took longer than expected to arrive, to the point I was ready to contact Dr. Randall and ask her if they'd changed their minds. Laura was over having tea with me the afternoon the delivery came. There was no warning, just a loud knock at my door that startled me, and it caused me to almost drop my cup of tea that I was holding. Laura and I both looked at one another, and I went to the front door to see who it was. I opened the door to a young man wearing black sunglasses, so you could barely see his face. Mom, are you Jacqueline Dunkirk? Yes. Oh, please sign here. I signed for the package, and then the man who had the large crate on a dolly wheeled it past both myself and Laura. We looked at one another as the man bid us goodbye and walked out my front door and got into a large black delivery truck with tinted windows so you couldn't see inside. I shut the door and then looked at the large crate, which was a bit taller than my icebox. "Ooh, is that your package?" asked Laura. I went over to the box, and on the side it had a red marking that said, "Product of Dolce Laboratories Worldwide." "Oh, yeah, it looks like," I said, confused. "Jeez, whatever's in that is as big as my 2-in-1 laundry unit." She smirked at me. I shot Laura a look, rolling my eyes. I tried to open the crate, but there was no latch to pull. Oh, I think I'm going to need a crowbar. Oh, I think Reggie has one in his toolbox he keeps in the back of my trunk. I nodded, and she ran to her car to get it. When she came back, we used the crowbar to tug at the door for what seemed like ages, and then we got the door off of it. We both stood back in amazement.
Holy shit, Jackie. Is this for real? Laura burst out laughing then. So they sent you a sex doll then? I scowled at the thought as I looked at it. Inside the tool crate was a man. He was tall, muscular, tan, dark hair and eyes. His skin was very human-like, not like a plastic doll at all. It looked soft to the touch, but I dared not touch it. I was a bit creeped out by his lifelike appearance. He wore only white boxers, and his front was covered in a very sheer plastic wrapping. I slowly removed it to find that he was stored in a gel-like substance, the consistency of one of those air fresheners. Around his large neck was a set of instructions. I took them in my hand, and then Laura and I both looked at them. Laura grabbed them from me and read them out loud. Hello, my name is George. To activate me, you will need to press the button at the small of my back. Only you will be able to activate me with the use of your fingerprint. Oh, no, I said to Laura, grabbing the instructions from her. This is too much. I'm calling that doctor right now to give her a piece of my mind. Laura looked at me, concerned. Are you sure? You mean you don't want to see what it's all about, even a little bit? Tears began to stream down my face, and Laura nodded, taking it as her cue to leave me alone. After Laura left the house, I pulled out my phone to call Dr. Randall, using the direct line she'd provided to me. Dr. Renee Randall here. Hello, Doctor. This is Jackie Dunkirk phoning you. Your package arrived about 15 minutes ago. I honestly don't know what to say. Is this a joke? No, not at all. Have you activated George yet? Absolutely not. Jackie, please don't be alarmed. This is a trial. He is a robot that specializes in acting like a real partner. He has a pre-programmed simulation to be a gentle and loving partner through the reproductive process. He is one of our first prototypes, based on our research done in numerous controlled environments and through use of psychological testing. He's designed to be an IVF device that is more personal. Through our research, we have found that most women don't conceive in an unloving environment, nor do they often conceive in the impersonal IVF procedures most clinics currently use. You see, most mothers need to be in a loving environment and have a support system, and through doing this trial, you will help others exactly like you. This is madness. How does it even work? He will learn your routines and help you that way. He will be the man that you need. He is your perfect mate during this process. Oh my God, I said, trying to grasp the concept of what was going on. You see, most of our research that has been done in prisons worldwide has proven that human beings need love from before conception until after. Just keep George for a few days, and if it isn't working, we can deactivate him from our central office, and one of our men will come and pick him up. Isn't that what you wanted, Jackie? A child to call your very own? What if George can offer that to you? I looked at the man in the box with the closed eyes, and after a long pause, I made up my mind to try. I followed the instructions and pressed my index finger to the tiny box feature on the small of his lower back. Within seconds, I heard a beeping sound, and then this thing took a deep breath and opened its eyes. I backed away from it, and he stared at me intently for a second, blinked twice, then smiled a friendly little smile at me. Hello, Jackie. I'm George. It's very nice to meet you. His voice was deep, but soft and unthreatening. I stood watching him, waiting for him to do something, and then he moved to bend over and detach a wire that was wrapped around his ankle. He stepped out of the tall crate and walked over to me and held out his large hand. I just looked up at him and couldn't say anything. I just stood in shock. Please don't be afraid.
I can tell your pulse is raised and your brow is sweating. Perhaps you could use a drink." He eyes the room, and without having ever been to my home before, he walked towards my liquor cabinet and opened it. He poured me a drink in a glass and added ice to it from my freezer. He handed it to me, smiling, and I began to laugh uncontrollably. "You're in shock. Here, drink up." I took a sip, and my hand shook, and then I chugged the remaining whiskey. He took the glass from me and laughed. He actually laughed, as though he were a human being. I looked up at him, and I had to admit, even to myself, well, he was gorgeous. He was tall and protective looking, yet there was something about his dark brown eyes. They were warm, almost lifelike. I couldn't explain. They glistened with a reddish hue and appeared thoughtful. I found myself slowly relaxing around him and found that he caught on very quickly to my routine. When I went to work, he had my coffee ready at exactly the time I needed it. My clothes were pressed and hung, and my house was spotless. He was my very own robot maid service. Days passed, and nothing happened between us that would make you ever think that his entire purpose of being created was to help me create human life. We played chess, and I got used to him. It was nice to have someone around after being alone for the last 3 years. Then, one evening, I'd just come home from work when it happened. George was waiting by the front door, watching me intently as he opened it for me. "Hello, George. You're looking a bit serious," I joked, considering, well, he was a robot. "It is time." "Time for what?" I was genuinely confused. "For me to help you conceive a child. Your body told me this morning you were nearing ovulation. Your temperature is raised as well, and we only have a short window of opportunity. Won't you join me in the bedroom?" I felt like I was going to faint. "George, I think perhaps I need to fully prepare for this." "I understand, but it's already been 2 weeks, and you only get 3 trials with me." I was genuinely nervous, and found myself stumbling over my words. "I need a moment to think." "Perhaps you could use a drink." He smiled at me. "That too," I said, looking at him. "Why don't you just relax? Do you like music?" "Love it." Just then my Alexa began to play soft jazz music on a volume not too loud or too soft. He had a drink in his hand faster than I could comprehend him preparing it. "Would you like to dance? Perhaps we could move to the music a bit so you can get used to touching me." I took a swig of my drink and a deep breath. He moved the hair from my face, tucking it behind my ears, and then gently placed his left hand around my hips, and in his right hand he took my own hand and began to slowly dance. This was odd even for me, but the alcohol had begun to take effect, and before I knew it, this robot was kissing me gently on the lips. Somewhere between dancing and his kissing me, it happened. I won't lie and say it wasn't good. It was outstanding. The way he moved was unlike any human man I'd ever been with. He was sweet, attentive, and romantic. The way he looked at me was like I was the most beautiful woman in the entire universe. The next morning, I awoke feeling awkward in my nakedness. I sat up in bed because I found that George was staring at me with a sort of gentle smile on his face. "You look embarrassed. Please don't be. Jackie, you are beautiful." Ah, there, he said it. Damn him. It was like he could read my mind. "How did you know when to arrive?" I asked awkwardly. "I'm prepared to hold off until you arrive, and then I do." "Yes, but you arrived and already had... you have sperm ready for me."
How does that work? Temperature controlled. It is stored up in me for up to 3 months, frozen for the most part, until you begin to ovulate, and then it begins to thaw. I hope I'm not making light of what is a very beautiful thing, creating life. No, I was just curious. It's also incredibly weird to me. Yes, I can see how you would think so. Would you like me to run you a bath? I nodded, and then he prepared my bath water. It wasn't too hot, not too cold, just perfect, like everything else he did for me. It was, in a sense, too good to be true. Laura called later that day to see how I was holding up. I don't know how to describe it, I told her. He sounds like every woman's fantasy. Hey, want to do lunch later today? I agreed, and Laura met me in the late afternoon. When she got to the door, George opened it before I could, and he stood there looking at her. Can't describe the look on his face, but it was as though he were reading her. Hello, I'm George. Yeah, and I'm the Queen, Laura said, dismissive of him, and walked over to me. Oh, he's creepy, isn't he? I rolled my eyes at her, and I noticed George was only eyeing Laura. Are you sure you should go now? I detect you'll be ovulating again in a few hours. Laura looked at me and looked back at George. Oh, bugger off. She's going with me. I looked at George as Laura pulled me with her out of the door. George looked at me like a puppy dog, but I noticed something in his eyes when he looked at Laura. Could it be jealousy? Surely not. He was simply protective, the way Dr. Randall had said he was supposed to be. The lunch I had with Laura went on longer than I thought, and then it turned into dinner and a few glasses of wine. I knew I shouldn't, but I needed a break from all the baby-making business. When I arrived home, all the lights were off in my house, and at first I began to feel frightened that something was wrong. However, when I opened the door, George had lit candles and was standing in the kitchen with a plate of shrimp cocktail and a sweet smile on his face. Thought you might be hungry. Did you eat with Laura while you were out? I sighed and shook my head. The shrimp looks delicious. How did you learn to cook and prepare drinks and meals? I'm programmed to know a little bit of everything. I smiled, and he came over to me and kissed my cheek. Once again, I found myself in his strong arms, pretending I was unaware he was only a computer on 2 legs. The weeks rolled by, and while the first trial didn't go the way I'd hoped, there was still hope after our last encounter. I was sitting in my kitchen having a glass of water and some toast, when George came in wearing a sweet smile. I have amazing news. The trial is over, and you are pregnant. I looked at him, puzzled for a moment, and then he walked over to me and pricked my finger. I've been able to detect the chemical change in your body, and with this tiny blood sample, I'll test it to be sure. But you are exactly 3 weeks along. I stood up, with tears in my eyes. Are you sure? I'm required to send over the test to Dr. Randall for her review, but I am positive. I was overcome with a joy I'd never experienced before. The last few weeks seemed to fly by, as George, per requirement, remained to help me until he was required to go. It was the last week he would be with me, when I noticed a change in George. He seemed a bit sad, and to be honest, I was feeling rather sad at losing him. I don't want to go, Jackie. I don't really want you to go either, George. I rather like having you here. Perhaps we could see if I could stay on longer. I thought about it for a moment, and I welcomed the idea. Being alone when you have a child is bad enough, but if George could stay on and help me during the first few months, that would be even better. I went to see Dr. Randall the next day,
so I could ask for an extension. "No, I'm afraid that isn't possible." "Why does he have to go so soon?" 12 weeks is all he was programmed for, Jackie. He must be sent back the way he came, not a moment before or a moment after. Someone will be round next Tuesday to pick him up. Dr. Randall was stern about it, and her decision was unwavering. I didn't want George to go. I broke the news to him when I arrived home, but he wasn't very happy about it. "I don't have to go. Not if you don't answer the door." I looked at George and smiled empathetically. "She said you're only programmed for 12 weeks. "But I learn from you, Jackie." I nodded in agreement, and he put his arms around me, holding on to me. It was hard to forget he wasn't a human being in moments like this. He was so soft, so real. Tuesday came, and just like Dr. Randall said, someone came to my house and expected George to be in a nice box just the way he came. To be honest, it felt wrong keeping poor George in a box. We stood by the door watching to ensure the man left. The man hesitated and then walked away, and off he drove in his all-black delivery truck. George high-fived me, and we had a good laugh. That night George danced with me, and we held each other while I fell asleep on his chest. The next morning, I awoke expecting George to be in the room next to me. I got out of bed and walked into the kitchen, but there was no sign of him. When I looked around the house, that's when I saw it. Laura was laying in my backyard. Blood covered my lawn, and the look on George's face was like nothing I'd ever seen. I knew with every fiber of my being she was dead. I wanted to run to her, to help her, to save her. But then he looked up at me. He noticed I was there, and he saw the terror on my face, and smiled at me as though he were trying to comfort me. "Jackie, she came here this morning, and she wasn't very nice to me when I told her I was staying. She called me a stupid robot, and I tried to tell her I love you. She wouldn't listen to reason, so I showed her. I showed her and her smart mouth good, didn't I?" I ran from George then and grabbed my phone. I hid in the bathroom, locking the door behind me. My hands shook as I tried to dial the number to Dr. Randall's office. I got her voicemail, so I dialed the telephone number that had been provided to me in case there was a malfunction with George. "Hello. Thank you for calling Dulce Laboratories. We're here to help the world become a better place one day at a time." "Damn you!" I screamed into the phone, pressing all the options until an operator came on. "Dulce Laboratories, Jenny speaking," a pleasant voice said to me. "I need help. I need it now." "What seems to be the issue?" "My robot's trying to kill me," I cried into the phone. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I couldn't make out what you were saying. Do you have an item number so I can look up your device?" "Please help me," I screamed hysterically into the phone. There was a loud banging on my bathroom door. And then I saw it. The hinges on the door were coming undone. "Jackie, I did it to help you, to help us." I heard the door handle jiggle, and then I heard what sounded like an electric drill going in the screws on the door. The bastard was taking off the door one screw after another. I was sure he was going to kill me if he got his hands on me. My hands shook as I dialed the police, my hands shaking as I pressed the buttons. 9, then 9. Then before I could hit the last button, I heard a loud explosion. I didn't know if it was a gun or a bomb going off in my house. I was too frightened to move. The door opened to my bathroom, and I screamed before I could see who it was. 2 men in black stood over me, and one of them was standing over George. I looked down at the monster and saw he was bleeding. George had blood coming out of him, and it was running into my hallway. I watched the crimson liquid slowly move towards where I was crouched on my bathroom floor. I looked up at the men, one of who was on the phone. "Yep, we got him. But there was a casualty." "Yep, just like the other one," he was saying as he walked away. The other man was eyeing me empathetically and helped me up off the floor. The police never came because Dolce Laboratories had come and cleaned up the mess. They cleaned my house, and they even tried their best with Laura. Luckily for both Laura and I, she wasn't dead. She'd suffered a very bad beating, but was recovering in hospital. Dolce made it look like a car accident. I had so many questions for Dr. Randall. I refused to let it go. Finally, after weeks of pressing her office to get answers about what happened with George, I was granted a meeting. "First, I need you to sign this non-disclosure form before I tell you the truth. We have to be sure that no one will ever find out about what happened." She held out the form, and I signed my name quickly and then shoved it back into her face. "Let me apologize for what happened with George." "I don't understand. I thought you said he was to be protective, comforting, helpful." "George was programmed for exactly a 12-week trial. He was made for women like yourself who were of a certain age, single, in need of a kind soul to make them feel good about themselves. Past 12 weeks, we didn't have a finished script. When you didn't return George, we didn't come in guns blazing to take him back. We wanted to see what would happen. Unfortunately, there are still some kinks to work out." "He was bleeding. How is that even possible?" Dr. Randall looked guiltily at me, and then she stood up as though she were trying to find the right words. "That is because he used to be human, like you." I looked at her, stunned, taking in short breaths to keep myself from freaking out. "You mean he was human, and that's why he looked so lifelike?" "In the United States, there are many men on death row. Instead of dying and forever being useless, we've given some of them the opportunity to donate their bodies to science here in England through one of our affiliate labs in Ohio, and that is how we obtained George. So instead of a formal execution, we rebuilt them and reprogrammed their brains using state-of-the-art technology. It's only a computer living inside of a human being, fitted with mechanical parts." "You mean George was a criminal?" "Yes. You are the third person to complete a trial with George. So far, you were the lucky one. I'm sorry to say all the others had worse incidents with George." I sat looking at Dr. Randall in disgust. "George did seem to have an attachment to you that went far beyond what happened with the others." "What was his crime when he was alive?" "I'd rather not go into specifics. Just tell me." "He murdered his wife because she left him. After she took out a restraining order, he stalked her, got her alone one night, then he stabbed her 83 times. He was sentenced to death because of the way he mangled the body. He stabbed her so hard in the neck, she was nearly decapitated." "And the other trial patients?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss that with you." "My baby? What about it? Should I worry about it? What did you do with George?" "Oh, he was sent back for more intensive reprogramming." I stood and walked out of Dr. Randall's office. I never spoke of what happened to anyone, well, because of legal ramifications. My daughter was born healthy, and I was happy about that. Laura went on to live a normal life and never remembered much about that day that George nearly beat her to death. Some months later, I was in the park with my young daughter and a friend from work. Some months later, I was in the park with my young daughter and a friend from work when I saw a man with a young woman. He was holding her hand, and then, when he stood up, he turned to look at me, still smiling. I sat, feeling terrorized, as the young man approached me and my friend. The young woman was oblivious, as I had once been. There stood George, standing over me, looking at my daughter. "Oh, she is quite lovely, isn't she?" he asked the young woman with him, and she nodded. "How old?" asked the young woman, smiling. 6 months, I said, barely able to get the words out. And they walked away. I hoped that he had indeed forgotten me. I stood up to go, and my friend and I had to pass them on the way out of the park. George looked at me, smiling as we went. "It was really great seeing you again, Jackie."
And so once again, we reach the end of tonight's podcast. My thanks as always to the authors of those wonderful stories, and to you for taking the time to listen. Now, I'd ask one small favor of you. Wherever you get your podcast from, please write a few nice words and leave a 5-star review, as it really helps the podcast. That's it for this week, but I'll be back again same time, same place, and I do so hope you'll join me once more. Until next time, sweet dreams and bye-bye.